Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan, and I'm an editor at Ahval News. And today joining me is my guest, Dr. Marwa Maziad, a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Marwa, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So what I want to start with is talking about the latest diplomatic standoff between France and Turkey, particularly after the murder of Samuel Paty in France. President Macron has announced a new strategy for dealing what he calls with the crisis of Islam in France and what he refers to as Islamist separatism. So what I want to ask you is, how should we really interpret this incident in the context of the disputes between France and Turkey that have been ongoing for some time now?
Well, the situation now goes back to Macron's speech on October 2nd, where he really laid out his problem with Islamist separatism, the idea that there is a counter society within France that is almost backed up and supported financially and ideologically by foreign agents, by foreign countries. He was straightforward in naming these countries. He called Turkey and Qatar as supporters ideologically to extremist version of Islam and also financially. And that goes back to the episode of these two countries forming an alliance where they supported mercenary jihadists in Syria, then Turkey sent those jihadists to Libya and then sent them to Azerbaijan. So they were trafficking in very mercenary jihadists over the past 10 years, almost since the Arab uprisings. All while also creating very strong ties with the regular Muslim citizens of France, not necessarily politically Islamized, but fielding the imams who give the sermons and do the teachings in France. And Macron has an issue with that, and he was very straightforward in this speech. And only on October 2nd he does that, and by later in the same month we have this assassination or killing of the school teacher, the French school teacher. So these are not separated incidents, but I think that was a response to Macron's clear message that he will stop the importation of imams from outside of France who were fielded from Turkey primarily, and having the French Muslims be the ones who are explaining and guarding and speaking about their faith for their own community and to the larger society at large. So he even said that he will do that amicably. It's not like he's gonna pick a fight with these countries he named, namely Turkey, but it has to be done. It has to be a French Islam, a French meaning the Islam of the Muslims of France, not the Islam of a country that has pan-Islamist transnational political ambitions in the region.
You know, it's almost a twist on of a few years ago, where very often when they would talk about these forms of Islam coming from abroad in the West that was influencing negatively Muslim populations there, it often came in the context of the imams originating from places such as Saudi Arabia that were teaching in mosques throughout France, Europe, the United States. But you wrote for a Middle East Institute an interesting article talking about Turkey's exported brand of political Islam, and now this is something that Macron has taken direct aim at after the murder of Mr. Paty. There's been a lot of talk now of almost a clash of civilization sort of narrative, especially as Erdogan is calling for a boycott of French goods, and this is being echoed in some parts such as Qatar, who's of course an ally to Turkey, and even in other countries such as Kuwait, who's a little more neutral in the region. But I want to ask you, Marwa, if you think that if this choice by Macron to go in this direction, does it actually feed into any way President Erdogan's agenda of trying to highlight a divide between, say, Europe and Islam, and then place himself kind of further in the role of the defender of Islam and more of a leader in the Middle East on this topic?
Look, you mentioned Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia used to be the one country that played that role and received these accusations of spreading Wahhabism, Salafism, which are the extremist version of interpretations of the religion, and was attributed to it the jihadists, the Al-Qaeda and all of that. That used to be the 90s up until 2015. Since 2015, Saudi Arabia itself revised these very failing and dangerous policies that used to employ Islam as a way of reaching political ends transnationally. So a country like Saudi Arabia would have a say over populations, Muslim populations everywhere. Saudi Arabia changed its course and allied with Egypt, UAE, the Emirates, and Bahrain in order to actually stand up against the other pan-Islamists, namely Iran and the newcomers, Turkey and Qatar. So people are aware, almost remember the times when we talked about Islamic radicalism and terrorism and all of that in the 90s and attributing that to Saudi Arabia. The irony and the sadness is that one country stops doing that and then Turkey picks up. So that's why we wrote this article, my co-author Jake Soteriadis and I, about Turkey's exportation of its own version of pan-Islamism that is transnational and that is now accused of the same attributes that Saudi Arabia used to do and quit and stop. So I think it's very important to talk about what happens when one country tries to interfere with the course of events in another country through supranational, transnational networks, the way Turkey is doing right now in France, and honestly also in Germany, and there is a resistance to it. So I don't think, I know that you're saying, well, if we push him now, would that mean that Erdogan would gain support from the rest of the Muslim world? I don't think so. I think the Muslim world now, I mean, Muslim majority countries like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, like Emirates, like Bahrain, like Tunisia for that matter, that is very influenced by Turkey, but is almost fed up with that influence. These are Muslim majority countries where the populations there do not want to subscribe to a foreign country like Turkey that tells them what the version of Islam should be or the politicization of Islam. So I don't think not politically confronting Erdogan's head on about what he's doing in Europe and the Middle East is the solution. No, I think Macron was right to actually state what he is going to do. He has some policies that he was going to apply, namely the imams. He's not going to allow these visas to the imams amicably. Why would Erdogan under that situation be so upset? What is he actually doing with those imams in these foreign countries, European countries? So no, I don't think, in fact, let's bring everything out in the open, and then individual Muslims should and are making strong distinctions between their faith as Muslims and the idea of political Islam as a political project emanating from specific countries at specific time periods. So I think they have agency, Muslims everywhere do, and I think this conversation had to be had.
And I just want to actually move over to a little bit more of a different topic, and that is over to the United States, which, as you know, we're going to have our presidential election on the 3rd. And there's a lot of speculation about how the final result can ultimately impact Turkey, given the close and, of course, controversial relationship between President Trump and President Erdogan. But, you know, at this point, there's a very real chance that Joe Biden could become president, and that could signal another shift in Middle East policy from Washington. But with Biden running, it makes me think about how it was during the Obama administration where you started beginning to see this sort of retrenchment uh, of the United States from abroad, and this shift away from the Middle East that did not, of course, begin with Trump, even if his actions there have been questionable to say the least. But is it likely to you that a Biden administration may seek to tip any of the scales in some of these current conflicts with Turkey that he's spoken out on, whether it's in the Eastern Mediterranean, Nagorno-Karabakh, or Libya? Or do you think it would be more sympathetic to some of the concerns of maybe America's regional allies, such as Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, in regard to Turkey?
Look, your question is important. US foreign policy is important. But I want to remind you that policies, regional dynamics shifted during the Obama administration. Obama started out he was well received in the Arab and Muslim world when he gave these speeches in Cairo and even Turkey. And people thought, well, that's great, that he's open to the Muslim world this way. After an episode of the September 11th and the ill reputation of Muslims everywhere. But during this time, it wasn't just about that. The Obama administration at the time started fielding almost the notion that came from certain think tanks at the time, his policy advisors, gave this notion that Muslim majority countries should be represented by Islamists, by degrees of variation of Islamists. So Muslim Brotherhood would be supposedly better than a very extreme jihadist version of Islamism. So here came the Turkish model, as if that's a moderate one. And there was resistance to that because actually, lo and behold, 17 years later, that same leader, Erdogan, and his party, single party rule at this point, over the past 17 years in Turkey, Turkey is no model in its democratic representation as such. Islamists are not the single representatives of Muslim majority countries. Otherwise, you would have Christians representing Western countries, and that's not the case. So what I'm trying to say is that we started at this point towards 8 years at the end of the Obama administration, you found that there are new regional dynamics. Countries like Egypt, who rejected population-wise and leadership-wise, rejected the hegemony of the Muslim Brotherhood in its affiliation with this foreign brand of Islamism emanating from Turkey. So there were drastic changes in 2012, 13, 14, 15. That was on Obama's watch. The regional dynamics shaped up and coalitions and alliances were formed, and we were left with the main fault line. Turkey, Qatar on one side, promoting pan-Islamism everywhere, in Gaza, in Tunisia, in Somalia, trying in Egypt and failing, in Syria, in Libya. And on the other side, you had the Arab Quartet, Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. All of that happened dynamically within the region, even though you had an Obama administration that was promoting certain policies against the interest and the direction of some players. So what I'm trying to say, this is a very long introduction to saying that Biden administration can try to set tones as much as it wants. It can try to shift directions. But what I'm always emphasizing in my analysis is that there are regional dynamics for the regional players. They see their own perceived threats and they respond to them and they change policies accordingly. So they have agency in that. So the quartet formed, for instance, the boycott of Turkey, of Qatar at the time, but all the demands they had to do with the Turkish pan-Islamist transnationalism. And all of that happened under an Obama administration. So even if there is a Biden administration that would shift from the current administration's direction, as in saying, okay, I am way more pro Turkey or veering towards Erdogan's policies, there will be resistance and counter responses from the region. And you actually see how those four quartet that I named, Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, are forming new alliance with Israel, for instance, in order to be a more solid, diversified regional coalition of forces against a more encroaching and expansionist Iran or Turkey for that matter. So my short answer is that I don't think a Biden administration, even if it tries to shift the ship so fast, on the ground, it cannot per se. No dictation there. So I would actually think that the current dynamics will continue whether there is a Biden administration or a Trump administration re-elected.
Of course, in terms of those regional dynamics, you mentioned one of them, and that is these normalization deals that we've been seeing between Israel and members of the, as you said, the Arab Quartet in the Middle East. And, you know, recently they're talking now about reaching another deal with Sudan. And on a previous episode, I did speak with Seth Frantzman about the role Turkey played in some of these normalization deals. And he was of the opinion that Turkey is sort of like the elephant in the room that's off, but it still ends up being a bit of an invisible elephant because a lot of the focus, at least in the United States, ends up being on Iran as the primary target of these normalization deals. But what do you make of Turkey's role in this regional shift towards normalizing relations between Israel and some of these Arab countries? And do you think that, say, the U.S. administration, whether it would be under President Trump or President Biden, may accurately understand Turkey's role in this?
Look, I always in my writing emphasize how much Turkey is the main fault line. Iran is almost the given. Everybody talks about Iran, and it's the given that the Gulf countries are threatened by Iran along with Israel. But I always said, and it proved to be correct, that Turkey in its own version of pan-Islamism and its alliance with Muslim Brotherhood is more of a threat to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Emirates than if not equal to Iran, more so because of the weight given to this moderation aspect. Iran is almost framed as the you know, that threat anyway, so as if we don't look to Turkey. So I'm always emphasizing how much Turkey was always the main point for these countries to come together, and it's definitely I wrote in actually my Global Futures report that came out of the US Air Force that before the normalization actually took place, so it was a futurist vision of how much Turkey's foreign policy and regional policies that are perceived as very reckless and dangerous is one factor that brought these quartet and Israel onto converging interests, and almost new converged upon narrations that would include theological interpretation that combine Arabs and Jews together, as Muslims and Jews together, hence the Abraham Accord as the term. So Turkey is definitely, in its expansionist pan-Islamist attitude, created an alliance that is against that, and the characterization of each country that is in this alliance is one that relies on statism, border defending attitude, militarization in the sense of defense doctrine, not offense. And each one of these countries defending itself came together and formed a bigger alliance. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. When one country becomes too threatening, the rest will come together against that. And that's what has been happening vis-a-vis Turkey.
Do you think that at least in your interpretation, or your analysis rather, that say American policymakers accurately are understanding towards the role that Turkey's playing in its deals, or do you think that it's been, like, at least on the U.S. foreign policy side, it's been much more caught up in sort of the larger Iranian threat and containing Iran and all of these other strategies that have been proposed in relation to Iran for the past 4 decades?
Well, U.S. foreign policy is made by people, and the U.S. Foreign policy community, at least, is divided into 2 camps. Those who see, who are maybe more Democrats, and they have the legacies that came out of the past administration, and those who are maybe they are looking for new legacies and new, fresh ways of looking at things, and that's how you saw Jared Kushner brokering these deals that nobody expected. So there are some of those who are still in this mode that maybe don't even see Turkey as a regional threat at all. Why? It's Muslim majority, Sunni. It would be the good one to maybe lead the entire nations. And, there were some people who were thinking, why not? But they tried it out. And I think now if people are analytically honest, they will see why countries do not want to be swept under some wing of some regional hegemon, be it Iran or Turkey for that matter. So I think people might be educated about that. Some people will be stubborn about their position. Some people are ideological in their position. So we see a variety of US foreign policy advisors, and I think we'll see how that plays out in the next administration.
So one question that I think lingers in a lot of minds in relation to some of Turkey's foreign policy actions is just how far is it able to go, or how far is it willing to go before it receives enough pushback to back down, or it just collapses on its own, choosing a direction, whatever it may be. Sinan Ulgen, he himself a former Turkish diplomat, and he writes as a fellow at Carnegie Europe, suggested in a piece in Foreign Policy that even Turkey's economy, as weak as it might be over the last few years, will not really serve as a damper on its ambitions, whether it's in the Caucasus, the Mediterranean, or the Middle East. And given its present sort of intransigence, even in the face of, say, Russia and Syria, or in the Caucasus, or of course the U.S. over the S-400, it almost seems to validate this argument a lot. But I want to ask you, how is it that Turkey manages to sustain all of these adventures abroad despite these internal weaknesses? And how long do you think that it would take more of these many alliances, whether it's between the European front in the Mediterranean and the Middle East alliances with Israel and so on? Do you think that it requires a more coordinated sort of strategy to get Turkey to change its mind?
First of all, Sinan is a Turkish patriot. He cares for his country, for the state, for the legacies of his country. So, of course, he cares for the state of Turkey, and we all care for the state of Turkey. I think maybe we should make a distinction between a Turkish state, the legacy of what the Turkish state used to be anyway, never a troublemaker anyway in its region, or to the west or to the east for that matter, was not. And the current Turkish regime. We should start describing Erdogan's regime. He's been there in 17 years, and he's inflicted a lot of problems in it used to be zero problems with neighbors. It's now problems with all neighbors. So we have a saying, when something exceeds its limit, it goes to the opposite. It's almost like a bell-shaped thing. Turkey has been rising economically and rising in terms of clout, and people revered it almost like it's a successful model of being engaged in its region. So that's the episode that Sinan, and I read his article, it's like here, as if making Turkey great. But there is a limit and a point when that greatness is not just for domestic, national, patriotic, built up and progress. It's stepping on other countries' interests, vital national security interests, interfering with political developments in other countries, namely the backing of the Muslim Brotherhood everywhere. So now it's no longer a Turkish affair and a domestic affair and economic affairs within a country called Turkey. Now it's international relations and relations across borders, and it's a regional order and international order. So Turkey developed over 17 years to the point where it's perceived as the threat it is. And that Turkish regime, I don't think Turkey itself, the state, and society for that matter, of course, they are not, nobody's having enmity with Turkey, the state, or Turkish society. But I think, to answer your question, I think I've written also about that, projecting scenarios, and I invite your listeners and viewers to check out this Global Futures report out of the US Air Force, where I actually made some scenarios. I think the Turkish pan-Islamist version will run its course. It's not getting adherence. It will consume the economic abilities of the Turkish state, all the success that were built in the first 10 years, let's say, is now going down. I remember in 2015, when 2005, excuse me, when the lira to the Turkish, the lira to the dollar was almost 1 to 1.1 or 1 to 1.2. Today it's 8.25. And some among my fieldwork interviewees, someone back in 2014 told me if the lira gets to 4, there will be a civil war in this country. Well, it's double that by now. And I think economically, this affect the ability of a country. Originally, I'm a civil military relations expert. So you cannot have all this military adventurism without a strong economy that backs it up. So eventually, Turkey will not be able to supply funds and ability to sustain all of these military adventures. But it has Qatar as a backer for this policy. So Qatar can support and pay. My anticipation and projection is that Qatar at some point, not so far away from now, will jump off this failing project itself. And Qatar then will not be able to, or will decline supporting Turkey in its major adventurism all over, left and right and center. So I think the development is that we've reached the cusp of this regime. We're going into something else, dwindling. And then, of course, then we will hope that Turkey will pick up again and pick up economically and in terms of its relation with the world, and come back to the rest of its neighbors, be it the Middle Eastern neighbors or the European neighbors for that matter. It's picking fights with everybody now, France and Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean. So it's not just a Middle Eastern affair; it's everywhere. And when you fight everybody at the same time, you run out of money and you run out of supporters, and maybe you run out of anybody to fight after that.
Dr. Marwa Maziad, it's been a pleasure to have you on to share your analysis of Turkey's foreign policy. I really hope that you'll join me again soon on Turkey Abroad.
Thank you very much.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.